In September of 2013, technical diver Evan Graves and underwater photographer Maya Sorensen disappeared during a routine dive in Lake McDonald in Glacier National Park. The search operation lasted for 2 weeks, but the water, with multi-layered thermo-wedges, flooded trunks, and sharp depth drops, did not provide any answers. The only artifact left in the case was a lost flipper found at a depth of 20 meters. Almost 2 years later, a storm would bring ashore the camera, which was thought to be irretrievably submerged. And it was this device that would show for the first time what neither sonar nor search teams had detected: a structure on the bottom that was not on any map, and a series of yellow silhouettes standing motionless at 40 meters, as if waiting for their turn. What the police saw in this footage would force them to completely rewrite the conclusions of the case and turn the spotlight back on the man who for many years had been considered the lake's impeccable savior. In early September of 2013, technical diver Evan Graves and underwater photographer Maya Sorensen rented equipment at the Glacier Mountain and Dive Center in the town of West Glacier. The owner of the facilities said during the official interrogation that he remembered the couple because of a short conversation that attracted attention. According to him, Maya insisted on an additional powerful flashlight, even though Lake McDonald is characterized by high water clarity. Evan looked tense. He repeatedly checked the composition of the breathing mixture and, according to the witness, looked at his watch as if he was afraid of being late for a planned but unknown dive. According to the investigation's reconstruction, they went to a sparsely populated area of the western coast, where an outdated logging road suddenly ends at the water's edge. It was there, on a dirt strip between fallen trunks and a narrow strip of rocks, that their car was found. Inside were smartphones with no call history for the last day, wallets with documents, and a map of the lake. A red marker on the map highlighted an underwater ledge that local fishermen call Sprague's Gap. This place is known for sudden depth changes and difficult underwater terrain. Judging by the engine temperature and onboard computer readings, the car was left in the early afternoon. Then the trail breaks off. There were no signs of a struggle near the car. The trunk contained a spare flipper belt and equipment for subsurface filming, which, according to experts, was not planned to be taken that day. When the couple did not return by the evening, their friends reported them missing. The search operation lasted more than 2 weeks and was one of the largest in the area. It involved park rescuers, scuba diving teams, and sonar operators. Lake McDonald has a typical feature of glacial reservoirs. Thick layers of cold water form a multi-layered blackout effect. Scanning the bottom yielded dozens of artifactual shadows created by submerged trunks, fragments of old piers, and uneven stone blocks. At a depth of about 20 meters, volunteer divers found only one flipper that belonged to Evan. The item was stuck in a snag between 2 massive branches of a flooded tree. According to the experts, the flipper found did not give a clear answer as to whether an accident had occurred or whether the object had been torn off by the current. No other pieces of equipment were found within a radius of several dozen meters. Despite repeated descents, visibility conditions were deteriorating every day, and the search had to be suspended due to bad weather. No third-party witnesses to the dive were found. The investigation found that no private boats were registered within a few miles that day, and official tourist routes were much further away from the parking lot. In the absence of additional evidence, the case was closed as a probable accident. The Commission's assumption was that the bodies could have been drawn by bottom currents into one of the many underwater crevices characteristic of the region. However, during the finalization of the materials, investigators noticed a detail that did not correspond to typical drowning cases. In Maya and Evan's car, they did not find a single element of spare thermal protection, which experienced divers usually take, even for short dives in cold mountain waters. And on the map, in addition to the marked Sprague's Gap, there was another thin marker trail that was lost on the western slope and seemed to lead deeper into the water, to an area not marked on any of the official routes. It was this barely noticeable line that made one of the inspectors review the materials again and appeal to the management with a proposal to resume the case as soon as at least one new artifact appeared. In early August 2015, after a severe storm, the coastline 8 kilometers below the disappearance site was covered with a layer of washed-up stones and wood fragments. Among them, a service worker found a waterproof box for an action camera. The case was scratched and partially damaged, but the lock remained tight. The camera was still inside, and they managed to get it working. The memory card was almost completely corroded, but the digital forensics lab was able to recover one file lasting about 18 minutes. The investigation at the time was led by Detective Mark Golden, who received the case after the initial report was deemed incomplete. It was he who reviewed the file for the first time. According to him, he expected to see the usual mess of footage inherent in critical situations underwater, or noise from the camera body hitting rocks. Instead, the file turned out to be an almost continuous recording of the dive, performed in a stable, controlled mode. The first minutes show a smooth descent into the water column. The visibility was extremely high that day. The cold layers created a characteristic bluish tint, but did not distort the contours. The camera attached to Maya's chest strap recorded her movements and Evan's position ahead. There were no signs of panic or technical problems. According to experts, their dive went according to plan, with no deviations in speed or direction. Toward the middle of the recording, the angle changes dramatically. The footage shows Evan giving a light signal from a little ahead. After analyzing the reflection in the glass of the box system, experts suggested that he was trying to draw attention to the object at the bottom. The streak of light from his flashlight revealed a vertical figure frozen at a considerable depth. At first glance, it might have appeared human, but further approach revealed that it was the polymer torso of an old store mannequin. The plastic showed clear signs of being in the water for a long time, and the nose was broken off. The figure was wearing a bright fisherman's cloak, the color of a ripe lemon. The mannequin stood motionless, fixed to a heavy plate with metal bolts. After a few turns of the camera, other silhouettes appear in the light beam. First one, then several more, until it becomes clear. Evan and Maya are facing a dense group of numerous mannequins, all wearing identical fishing coats and hoods pulled low over the place where their heads should be. Experts estimate that there could be more than a dozen of them. They were arranged as if they were forming a line, facing in the same direction, toward a dark fault in the massif of underwater stones. The impression was that these inanimate figures had been standing there for a long time and were staring intently into an unknown hole. In the next seconds of the recording, the camera shakes. Experts at the digital lab suggest that Evan was subjected to a sudden physical impact from behind. A burst of air and an atypical shift in the shadow are visible in the frame. Maya instinctively turns the camera, but the device is knocked out of her hands. The camera falls upside down and continues to record, lying on the bottom among the fine silt. At this moment, massive rubber boots of an old model enter the lens. The gait is characteristic. The steps are slow, directed directly towards the camera. The image is distorted by the water, but it is possible to distinguish the reflection of the mask, which barely shows the eyes, devoid of emotion. Then the recording enters a phase that forensic experts called staged composition. Someone lifts the camera and sets it on a flat stone so that the lens is pointed at a group of mannequins. A few seconds later, Evan and Maya appear in the frame. They are still alive, but both have limited movement. Their arms are fixed to metal supports in the mannequins' bases. They are wearing the same bright fishermen's cloaks that were on the inanimate figures. According to experts, these actions were performed in conditions of complete control over the victims. The air bubbles escaping from Maya's regulator indicate that she is trying to shout something, but due to the noise of the water and the distance of the microphones, it is impossible to make out the content. The last seconds of the video show Evan's gaze. It is directed directly into the lens, and there are no signs of struggle, only a pronounced degree of fear. After that, the device suddenly turns off, and the file ends. When Detective Golden reviewed the recovered footage in its entirety, he noticed a subtle shift in the shadow at the entrance to the underwater fissure, as if someone or something was standing outside the light cone and retreated a few centimeters into the darkness. After the video file was recovered, the investigation team held several closed-door meetings, at which it was decided to expand the range of possible suspects. Yellow raincoats and the use of old polymer mannequins became the central details. These elements pointed to a person who was familiar with the materials at hand, able to work with large objects and move them regularly. The operatives focused their attention on residents of the neighborhood who had access to abandoned warehouses, workshops, or old retail spaces. During this period, the database received a report from an employee of the Municipal Recycling Service, who had reported unusual purchases of mannequins by a local collector a few years earlier. The man in question was Arthur Vance, an elderly man who lived in a remote area near the Flathead River. He used to work as a restorer in a small art center, but later became a hermit, and according to his neighbors, was engaged in turning trash into installations. During an official interview, Vance's neighbor noted that his yard always looked like an exhibition because there were dozens of damaged mannequins in various poses. These figures were dressed in colorful clothes and changed positions from time to time, which caused local residents to be anxious and reluctant to intervene. According to several residents, Vance rarely went out to meet people, but regularly traveled to old warehouses where he sometimes dismantled decommissioned commercial equipment. A request to the trade archives confirmed that in the year of Evan and Maya's disappearance, Vance purchased a large batch of brightly colored fishing coats. The quantity was unusual, even for a bulk purchase, but the transaction had no signs of an offense and did not arouse the interest of law enforcement at the time. When the investigators compared the details found in the video with the procurement documents, they came up with a working version of Vance's possible involvement in the events on the lake. After that, covert surveillance was conducted. A few days later, the operatives noticed that there were trails leading from the back of Vance's plot to river channels with deep holes and little-known water outlets. Heavy objects could be transported along this route without attracting the attention of tourists. The official report states that this location is theoretically suitable for the preparation or storage of large installations. No one noticed any strangers in Vance's house. The lights were rarely turned on at night, sometimes only in the studio. the windows of which were partially covered with plywood. In the daytime, the man moved slowly, often stopping near mannequins as if to check their location. This made investigators suspicious of his psycho-emotional state. According to a former colleague, Vance had a pronounced tendency to create compositions from fixed figures, and often repeated that people are too loud and plastic is more submissive. When operatives received permission to conduct a surface survey of the surrounding area, they found several damaged polymer torsos in the lakeside thicket that, according to expert opinion, could have been part of the same batch as the mannequins at the bottom of the lake. One of them was fixed to a metal pin with a bolt with a thread similar in shape to the one seen in the recovered footage. The next step was to examine Vance's household purchases. According to the data from the hardware store, the man had indeed purchased several dozen raincoats. Formally, they fell under the category of rain and wind protection, but their number exceeded the amount usually typical for private individuals. The seller was unable to provide specific explanations, except that Vance behaved calmly, did not bargain, acted confidently. This detail, combined with the previous observations, only strengthened the investigation's working version. After analyzing the video, behavioral experts consulted on the likely profile of the perpetrator. Their preliminary findings largely coincided with Vance's biographical data. A tendency to isolate himself, constant work with mannequins as a substitute for social contacts, and the accumulation of clothes to create similar figures. The memorandum states that this pattern of behavior may be consistent with a person who seeks to create symbolic compositions with control over living objects. Despite the lack of direct evidence, the investigation formed a convincing motive for further action. It was decided to initiate an official inquiry into his mental state, as well as to obtain a warrant to inspect the workshop, where remnants of materials similar to those in the video could be stored. The preparations for the inspection lasted several days, and it was during this period that one of the surveillance cameras recorded a sudden change in Vance's behavior. For the first time in a long time, he left his house for the river late at night, carrying a large polymer package on his shoulder. It was this nighttime outing that triggered an immediate operational response and changed the course of the investigation. Before I continue the story, let me address you. If you are listening to this story for the first time or returning to it again, please subscribe to the channel, like it, and leave a comment. The platform's algorithms respond to activity, and this is how investigative stories find their audience. Your gesture helps to ensure that such cases do not get lost in the shadows and are heard by a wider range of people. The operational phase of the case of Arthur Vance began after superficial observations confirmed that the man was actively moving large packages at night and avoiding any contact. Based on this information, the Special Task Force obtained a court order to conduct a search of his business premises. The choice fell on an old barn located on the outskirts of the site, where, according to preliminary estimates, some of the materials related to his so-called installations could be stored. The assault began in the early hours of the day. Employees described the situation as unfavorable for inspection. The doors were reinforced with metal plates, and the floor inside was covered with layers of sawdust mixed with polymer fragments. The first minutes of the search confirmed a significant number of items that could be related to the disappearance of the diving couple. Disassembled mannequins were lying along the walls. Torsos, individual limbs, damaged heads with cracks and scuffs. Most of them had been abandoned, but some had fresh marks of handling, indicating recent intervention. The operatives found several jars of wax on one of the tables. According to the preliminary findings of the technical team, Vance used this material to fix plastic elements or form surface layers. However, the most disturbing finds were two empty diving tanks, on which experts later found the initials Evan and Maya. The external condition of the cylinders did not allow us to establish the exact time of their disappearance, but the fact that they were in the barn created a new vector for the investigation. On the north wall of the room hung a large sheet with a topographic map of Lake McDonald. In the center, there was a handwritten mark, Audience. According to the inspection report, this inscription did not match any official hydrographic names. The term could refer to both the underwater area and the location Vance himself had chosen for the installation of the compositions. Nearby were notes with fragments of incomprehensible alphanumeric codes, but their decoding at the time yielded no results. During the examination of the barn, the investigation team found a disguised hatch leading to a narrow basement. It was there, according to the official, the most controversial materials were located there. In the corner was a box with photographs taken on various film and digital media. Some of them showed people who disappeared several years ago in the vicinity of the national park. Their faces were cut out and glued to the heads of mannequins in various compositions that formed eerie scenes. Official documents state that all these installations had the character of obsessive fixation and repetition. While the special unit was examining the basement, a loud bang was heard in the upper part of the house. According to one of the operatives, he heard the sharp sound of a window pane breaking and a door creaking, and then witnessed Vance using a narrow hole between two walls to get out. Further pursuit became impossible due to the dense shrubbery and numerous exits to river channels. It is known that Vance was much better at navigating the terrain than his pursuers, and his house had several unofficial exits created by the previous owners. Within hours of his escape, national news outlets published reports that Vance had been placed on a federal wanted list. Local newspapers began publishing stories under headlines such as "The Puppeteer from Glacier," giving the case a high-profile character. For the public, he became a key figure in the investigation, as the presence of cut-out photos and hundreds of mannequins seemed to be unequivocal proof of his involvement. Social media speculated about his long-standing connection to the underwater installations, with some observers even calling him the author of the underwater collection. Meanwhile, the investigation team recorded another circumstance. During the inspection of the workshop, one of the technicians noticed a wooden shelf with old metal tools. Between them was a sheet with a mark made with a black marker, which was not recorded in the previous inspection reports. It had a barely visible handwritten symbol on it, a thin line that resembled the outline of the entrance to an underwater grotto. And it was this detail that made the head of the operation suspend the initial processing of the materials and return the group to the barn for a second inspection. After Arthur Vance's escape, a separate task force was formed, which spent several days combing remote riverbeds, abandoned hunting huts, and tunnels of unfinished industrial facilities. It was only late in the evening, according to the official report, that Detective Mark Golden discovered a heat signature at the entrance to an old adit located on a slope that had not been visited by tourists for a long time. According to his testimony, Vance was inside, leaning against a stone wall, as if he was expecting an imminent arrest. During the first contact, the man did not resist. The report states that his hands were shaking and his behavior resembled a state of deep exhaustion. Golden said that it was at the moment of the arrest warning that Vance suddenly shouted out words that later became key to further examination. The content of the exclamation was restored from the detective's words. "I didn't do it. I only wanted to protect them, or at least preserve their memory." This fragment was included in the case file with the note, "Requires psychiatric analysis." During the official interrogation, which took place within the temporary detention center located near the place of detention, Vance told his version of events. According to him, he came across the underwater group of mannequins by accident when he was looking for metal structures for his workshop. He described the arrangement as a strange line that stood in silent reverence. His testimony says that it was this sight that struck him and made him fall into a trance that would not let go. According to the reproduced words, Vance watched the figures for some time but did not touch them. He went on to explain the situation with the cylinders. He claimed to have found them after the divers had died, when, in his words, the water was still and the silhouettes did not change their position. Vance stated that he wanted to sell the equipment as scrap metal, but later got scared of responsibility. Experts noted that his testimony was inconsistent, but the fact that he mentioned the cylinders he found coincided with the location of the cylinders found during the barn search. Vance's statements about the yellow cloaks were the most disturbing. In his words, recorded in the protocol, he said that the use of the same type of clothing was not his idea. He called the cloaks someone else's mark and claimed that the compositions were being monitored by someone who fights chaos. According to Vance, he allegedly saw a boat that did not belong to private owners. In official documents, this fragment is labeled as a government boat. There was no confirmation of this statement at the time. The interrogation report contains a clear mention of a sharp change in Vance's behavior after these words. He was silent for several seconds, looked at the floor, and then, without looking up, said that whoever set up the line can come back. At this point, Detective Golden made a note of the need for additional security measures and a psychiatric examination of the detainee. At this point, the outer post staff reported unexpected activity near the entrance to the adit. Sensors detected movement in the darkness outside the line of sight. After interrogating Arthur Vance, Detective Mark Golden decided to return to the source material, the audio track of the found video. Initial reports did not consider it to be a key piece of evidence, as most of the noise seemed to be the result of turbulence underwater. However, Golden noticed a short metallic pulse at the time of the attack on the divers. To rule out artifacts from the equipment, he sent the track for a separate technical examination. Specialists from the Acoustic Center conducted an analysis, restoring the spectral frequencies. It was they who recorded the sound, which was described as a short, clear mechanical closing movement. The conclusion was that it could not have been a fragment, a rock, or a piece of equipment. After comparisons with samples of different locking systems, the diving equipment expert made an official statement. The sound was consistent with a Meg lock carabiner system. These devices are not commercially available. They are made for extreme conditions and are used by rescue units that need to instantly lock a line in a fast current. According to Glacier Park official documents, a similar batch was purchased only once, for a specialized group of water rangers. This information was disturbing because the exact number of such carbines was small, and each was assigned to a specific employee. That's when Golden noticed a name that appeared in the archives of the search operation after Maya and Evan disappeared. Captain David Ross was in charge of the water rescue team at the time. In his job description, he is described as an experienced officer with impeccable discipline and resilience in crisis situations. In the report of those years, he appeared as the main contact person who coordinated the dive, the distribution of forces, and the fixation of visual survey areas. When Golden reviewed the materials again, he noticed one detail. The list of equipment issued to the rescuers for the operation included a set of high-speed clamps assigned to Ross. Another document from the same period mentioned that Ross was among those who first arrived at the search area and inspected the coastline where the missing car was found. The mere fact of the rare carbine's presence did not prove anything. However, its echo in the video, at the moment when the camera was recording the attack, raised questions about the role of the official search team in the first hours after the diver's disappearance. Golden began to review additional materials collected throughout Captain Ross's career. His colleagues' descriptions of him were respectful, but also contained indirect references to the considerable psychological pressure he had been under for years. Some colleagues described him as a man who felt overly responsible for those who could not be saved. A report from the Psychological Service, drawn up long before the events, contained a note about professional burnout and a tendency to pedantic control. It spoke of the need to structure the environment, which could be manifested in the obsessive ordering of objects around him. Combined with the video, where the mannequins are arranged in a clear sequence, this information led Golden to formulate a new working hypothesis that did not fit the version of Vance. When the detective compared all the available data, the sound of the carbine, Vance's lack of access to military models of clamps, mapping and characteristics of the mannequin installation, he asked the archive team to provide a detailed list of all employees who had access to special equipment during the search operation. Captain Ross's name was again at the top of the list. In the evening of the same day, Golden watched the recording in a dark office, slowing the image to a minimum pace. In the glare of the flashlight sliding across the yellow cloaks, he made a discovery. The silhouette of the attacker, captured in the glass of the mask, had a patch on his shoulder. It was blurry, but it had a shape that Golden had seen in his official files. That's when the motion detector at the entrance to the investigative department reported unexpected activity in the corridor. After reviewing the audio track and identifying Captain David Ross as likely to be involved, Detective Mark Golden prepared an internal report, but did not have time to finalize it. According to information from the Access Control Service, Ross entered the department's archive sector before dawn, using his old service code. This meant that he was reviewing the case files on the disappearances of Maya Sorensen and Evan Graves, and could have learned about Vance's arrest. Golden assumed that if Ross considered the old man a threat, he would try to destroy any remaining evidence that could incriminate him. The detective immediately went to the mooring area where the service boats were parked. According to the security report, Ross's vessel left the dock at night without an official request, and his tracker stopped transmitting data a few minutes after launching. It was the absence of a signal and the direction in which the rescuers usually went during underwater operations that allowed Golden to suggest a route. In the area of the lake labeled by Vance as the auditorium, the installation shown in the video could have remained. Official reinforcements were too far away. The procedure for launching a rescue team required lengthy approval, and time was of the essence in this case. Golden decided to go on his own. He opened the evidence warehouse where the equipment taken from Vance's barn was stored. According to internal protocol, access to it was allowed only under supervision. but the detective prioritized speed of response. All the equipment appeared to meet the standards of technical diving, although it showed signs of recent repair. The weather conditions on the lake were difficult. According to the meteorological station, there was a sharp drop in airflows on the surface, which created dark wave streaks. However, such conditions could have hidden the presence of Ross's boat. Golden directed the vessel to the western slope of the lake, guided by his own markers created during previous search operations. When the detective reached the alleged entry point to the underwater grotto, he spotted the vessel away from the shore and began preparing for the dive. The investigation materials indicate that the temperature of the surface water layer was critically low, which made it difficult to stay at depth for a long time. After putting on his gear, Golden turned on his flashlight and took his first test breath to check the condition of the regulator. There were no signs of a malfunction. The underwater environment quickly absorbed all sounds. The water column became thicker, and the layer of cold flow became harder. According to an approximate reconstruction of the route, Golden moved parallel to the slope, where sharp elevation changes formed dark corridors unsuitable for use by rescuers during standard operations. However, it was these corridors that were most often mentioned by experienced divers as dangerous but suitable for covert action. At a considerable depth, the light of the flashlight began to pick up sediment that moved in unnatural jerks. According to the experts, this could indicate the recent presence of another diver or a change in the bottom structure. The lower down Golden went, the more disturbed footprints he saw. Some stones were shifted, others were covered with fresh scratches from equipment. All of these markers were enough to make him realize that someone had already walked this route. The light beam first hit an object that looked like a piece of metal. Later, experts confirmed that it was part of a charge casing used for blasting by rescue units. The discovery of this object allowed us to formulate a version that Ross might intend to destroy the underwater installation by collapsing the entrance to the grotto. Ahead, the light level changed. Golden's lantern snatched from the darkness a wall with boulders hanging over a narrow passage that looked like a cut in the rock. The structure of the grotto matched what had been seen in the video before the attack. The sediment danced in the light, and the deep silence made it seem as if the water in this place absorbed even its own sound. When Golden reached the entrance, he noticed fresh marks on the stone, narrow scratches that resembled the marks of a metal boot used by the park's water rescuers. He slowly pushed the flashlight deeper into the fissure, trying to catch the silhouette. However, before the beam could dispel the darkness, the detective felt a sharp jolt in the water column, as if something in the depths had shifted in response to his presence. At a considerable depth, the water became thicker, and the light beam of the detective's flashlight became more blurred. As Mark Golden entered the interior of the grotto, the sediment slowly rose and danced in the darkness, as if responding to his movements. It was then that the rays first caught the silhouettes captured by the camera of the missing divers. In the water column, in the underwater twilight, stood mannequins in yellow cloaks. They swayed in the weak current, creating the illusion of breathing. The official report would later note that the painting resembled a motionless procession arranged with amazing symmetry. In the center of this composition, between the plastic figures, the detective saw two human bodies tied to metal pins. According to later medical findings, both bodies were preserved abnormally well due to the long-term exposure to cold water and the absence of organic processes in the depths of the grotto. Maya Sorensen and Evan Graves were standing in the aisle between the mannequins, as if they were part of an established formation. When Golden shifted the beam of the flashlight upward, he noticed a figure moving along the grotto's vault. Captain David Ross was working with the explosive charges, securing them to the stone ledges. He did so calmly and confidently, like a man who had long calculated every step. Golden's testimony confirmed that Ross had a rare carbine attached to his chest system, the sound of which was heard on the video. When Ross finally turned around, he showed no signs of aggression. His gaze slid past the detective, as if assessing not the man, but the threat to the composition he had created. The case file states, Captain Ross could not be described as an attacker in the usual sense. He did not defend himself or flee. It was clear from his behavior that it would not be possible to hide the traces. Instead of trying to run away, Ross backed up and stopped between the dummies, aligning his body with their positions. The straight line of cloaks fluttering in the water seemed to welcome him into an underwater procession. According to Golden's testimony, the captain paused for a moment, touched the carbine with his hands, and attached himself to a metal cable at the bottom of the grotto. The detective's flashlight caught him withdrawing his hand, the key and knife slowly disappearing into the darkness below him. Then Ross took the decisive action. He exhaled through the regulator, disconnected it, and threw it aside. A cloud of bubbles rose in the water column, which were illuminated by the flashlight, creating a brief glare that looked like a moment of hot metal. Golden tried to get closer, to fix him and lift him up. But Ross, according to the detective, looked up for the first and last time, a look that was glassy, indifferent, and at the same time directed somewhere past the mannequins, as if he were moving on to his own life. When the body finally froze, the mannequins around it slowly swayed in an invisible flow, giving the impression that they were accepting a new member of the formation. The reflection of the yellow cloaks in the lantern momentarily blurred the line between the plastic figures and Ross's body, and Golden was, as the official wording goes, confronted with a picture that is difficult to distinguish from staged or ritualistic. When the detective gave the signal to rise, his lantern slid one last time along the far edge of the grotto. There, among the shadows and the cold suspension of water, he saw movement, a barely perceptible silhouette that did not belong to any of the mannequins. The remains of Evan Graves and Maya Sorensen were recovered and returned to their families for burial. Arthur Vance was released after the examination, and he left the state and did not appear in official registers. The case was closed with the wording, "Investigation completed with the perpetrator identified." However, divers working on Lake McDonald sometimes report single yellow reflections in the area of old, deep faults. According to them, some of the dummies have not been found, and what remains below is not always motionless.